Good morning, everyone, and warm welcome to this side event called Zooming in on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, launch of the 2023 Disability Data Initiative report. My name is Mia Raine. I'm Ambassador, Deputy Permanent Representative at the Permanent Mission of Finland to the United Nations, and I will be your moderator this morning. So really great to have you all here. It's a great pleasure and privilege for me to give the opening remarks in this important event. And I would like to also thank the Fordham Research Consortium on Disability for putting this event together, and thank the other co-sponsors of the event, namely CBM, Global Disability Inclusion, and the UNPRDP for being part of this event. But before we begin, I will mention a few housekeeping notes. This event has live captions. To access the captions, click on live transcripts and then show subtitles. So click on live transcripts and then show subtitles. We also have international sign interpreters, and there is simultaneous translation in French and in Spanish, which you will find on the French and Spanish channels. I hope you were able to find all these functions that I mentioned. Very good. And now, dear participant, as I mentioned in the beginning, this side event focuses on data collection concerning persons with disabilities. The theme is very significant, and Article 31 of the UN Convention also obliges state parties to compile statistics and collect data on the status and realization of the rights of persons with disabilities. On the other hand, Article 8 of the Convention obliges to raise awareness. Data collection and awareness are naturally different things, but they are also intertwined. It has been said that we live in a post-truth era. It has referred, among other things, to the fact that there is a lot of inaccurate information, which is more based on beliefs, is circulated on the internet, and it is circulated on the internet and social media. It is therefore understandable that more emphasis has been placed on knowledge-based management and knowledge-based decision-making. This also applies to advancing the rights of persons with disabilities. Firstly, in order to devise strategies for action in this regard, we need a common view of what is happening at the moment. However, forming a common view requires factual information, both statistics and reliable data collected on the experiences of persons with disabilities. It is also a question of efficient use of scarce resources and correct allocation. Since we cannot solve all problems at the same time, we should try to start dealing with the most urgent or most difficult issues. Without research data, we may not necessarily recognize the right things to start from. Secondly, information can also be collected in many ways. Information on persons with disabilities can be obtained through population surveys, for example, if questions related to disability are included in the surveys. In Finland, in my home country, for example, a so-called school health survey is conducted every couple of years for school children of a certain age in the entire age group. It has been observed that this has provided valuable information on the functional limitations of school children as part of larger research. The monitoring of the implementation of services for people with disabilities should be further developed. In Finland, services are granted based on individual needs. In this spring, Finland adopted a new act on disability services, which includes a wider range of services that can be combined in different ways so as to create a suitable combination of services for each person with disabilities. Furthermore, sample surveys focusing directly on persons with disabilities are also needed. These studies provide more in-depth and accurate information on the lives of persons with disabilities. However, in these surveys too, it is extremely important to remember accessibility, such as assistive device users, easy to understand language, sign language, etc., so that we can ensure that all those persons with disabilities who are not able to respond to the survey on the internet can respond it in other means. I would like to also emphasize the personal experiences of persons with disabilities. It is often relatively easy to obtain statistical data, for example, on the recipients of various financial benefits or the numbers of users of certain services. But the persons with disabilities personally experience their lives. But how persons with disabilities personally experience their lives and what they encounter in their everyday life is even more important. For this reason, it is important to conduct inquiries and interviews with persons with disabilities and organizations representing them. This provides a better overall picture of reality. Dear all, we also need research at different levels, both nationally, regionally, and globally. Today, we will hear very good examples of how this kind of multi-level research can be carried out and what results can be achieved. We will discuss the theme and exchange ideas, and above all, learn from each other and keep this important theme on the agenda. So these were my opening remarks, and we will now move to the panel discussion. And in this webinar, in the end, there will be some time for questions and answers. And you have the opportunity to include your comments or questions in the Q&A box that you can find in the Zoom. Very good. But let's go now to the excellent panelists we have. And first, I'd like to introduce the first speaker. She is Sophie Mitra, Professor of Economics, Founding Director of the Research Consortium on Disability at Fordham University in New York City, and Principal Investigator of the Disability Data Initiative. She has produced evidence to document disability inequalities and to understand the factors that drive them, such as discrimination or extra costs of living for families. So Sophie, please, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Raine. And hello, everyone. Is the sound okay? Yeah, okay. The script of this talk is going to be available through a link that Dina is going to include in the chat box very shortly. Here you go, it's in the chat box now. I'm a woman in my 50s with gray hair, white skin, and wearing a pink blouse, and very happy to be here with you. So what I'm going to present is the work of a large team based in different parts of the world. So first, I would like to acknowledge my co-editors, Jean Hannas-Hancock, GVS Murthy, Michael Palmer, Monica Pinilla-Ronconcio, Minerva Rivas-Verarde. And it's also the work of several research assistants and contributors to the data analysis. So I would like to highlight in particular the work of Catherine Tace, PhD student at Fordham University, who analyzed a lot of the microdata. I'm also very grateful to the steering committee of the Disability Data Initiative for strategic guidance and feedback on the report draft, and to the Wellspring Philanthropic Fund for their funding. So I will share with you the key findings from the 2023 report. It's on the Disability Data Initiative website. The link is going to be in the chat box, and I will read it out loud. It's https://disabilitydata.ace.fordham.edu/. The report is in 3 parts, with the key findings in the main text. and selected country findings in country briefs. For each country, we have comprehensive results in big results tables in an Excel file. I'm not going to use slides. A couple of times I will share my screen to highlight tables and figures on the website and with links in the chat box. So as background, since 2006, 186 countries have ratified the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, the CRPD. And in 2015, governments have adopted the Sustainable Development Goals, a policy agenda promising to leave no one behind. So in that context, the Disability Data Report has two objectives. First, it reviews what data is available to identify persons with disabilities all over the world so that we know to what extent persons with disabilities are potentially visible and accounted for in national statistics. So I say potentially because the fact that disability data is collected does not necessarily mean that it is analyzed and used. In fact, we already know that statistics on human rights and development continue to be very rarely disaggregated by disability status. Is it because the data is not collected? So that's the first question we try to answer. And then we focus on countries that collect disability data and answer the question, what is feasible in terms of disaggregating indicators? Is it that the data is collected, but perhaps does not lend itself to disaggregation by disability status? Or is it that the disaggregation work is yet to be done? Finally, we analyze the data and we have findings on the share of adults with disabilities and on disability disaggregated indicators at national and subnational levels in 15 countries. So producing both national and subnational statistics on the situation of persons with disabilities is important because the CRPD may be a tool used by national and local governments to make their policies inclusive of people with disabilities. In fact, in countries that have not ratified the CRPD, like the US, subnational estimates can inform policies, as some local governments use the CRPD to uphold disability rights. Recent evidence also shows that the COVID-19 pandemic and the climate emergency have had varied effects depending on geography, and that persons with disabilities are more at risk during disasters and extreme climate events due to a lack of inclusive planning, a lack of accessible information, early warning systems and transportation, and due to discriminatory attitudes. Producing local statistics can help inform local policies and programs. So first, regarding our review of data sets, this report examines the questionnaires of close to 1,300 data sets from 188 countries to identify those with functional difficulty questions. For example, questions on difficulty seeing, hearing, walking, concentrating, or remembering. So why functional difficulty questions? Well, that's because functional difficulty questions follow the United Nations guidelines for disability measurement in censuses. We also specifically track surveys and censuses that use the internationally comparable and tested Washington Group short set, what I'll refer to as WGSS, which has questions related to difficulty seeing, hearing, walking, concentrating, remembering, self-care, and communicating. So the WGSS enables the monitoring of disability rights and the production of internationally comparable statistics. So what do we find? We find that about 1 in 5 of the data sets reviewed for the 2009 to 2022 period have functional difficulty questions. 125 countries were identified as having at least one data set with functional difficulty questions, including 70 countries with at least one data set with the WGSS. So this is progress compared to where we were 10, 20 years ago in terms of data availability. In fact, global trends suggest an increase in the share of data sets with the WGSS during the 2010s. In the early 2020s, high-frequency phone surveys rolled out by countries and international organizations during the pandemic, however, often did not include the WGSS. The results also show a lot of variation in the collection of functional difficulty questions across world regions. For instance, in Europe and Central Asia, functional difficulty questions continue to be rare in surveys and censuses, while in Sub-Saharan Africa, Middle East and North Africa, East Asia and the Pacific, their availability has markedly increased. So as a result, despite a lot of progress, there is still a need for more data collection in countries where data is lacking and in countries where we find data, but such data is yet to be collected on a regular basis. So we recommend a couple of things, that it should become standard for questions on functional difficulties such as the WGSS to be included in national surveys and population censuses, including during emergencies such as pandemics, to track the inequalities persons with disabilities experience and to inform and monitor policies. In some countries, more resources may be needed to strengthen the national capacity to collect functional difficulty data through surveys and censuses. Now, for countries with data, what can be done with it? So I will now move to our analysis of data in 15 countries to explore the potential to disaggregate indicators by disability status at both national and subnational levels. I will start with a bit of background on the method we use. Persons with disabilities are a diverse group in many ways. For instance, in terms of disability type, degree of functional difficulty, gender, age, where they live. So in terms of degree, disability statistics on prevalence and inequalities can be estimated using different cutoffs on the degree of functional difficulties based on the WGSS. So the 4-point answer scale for each question is no difficulty, some difficulty, a lot of difficulty, and unable to do. For instance, one could have two groups, persons with no and some difficulty together, and then persons with a lot of difficulty and unable to do in another group. So we show results using 3 ways of categorizing disability, and results are in tables, in gigantic and perhaps scary looking tables. But the way we find to be most informative is to distinguish 3 groups: persons with no difficulty, persons with some difficulty, and persons with a lot of difficulty or unable to do. In cases where sample sizes are small for the disaggregated analysis, for instance, when we compare people with different types of disabilities with survey data, then we contrast persons with no difficulty to persons with any level of difficulty. So that is some, a lot, or unable to do altogether. To get a sense of the size of the disabled community, we also consider persons with any level of difficulty, some, a lot, or unable to do. Based on our research in many countries, persons with some difficulty are also at risk of deprivations and exclusion, and therefore we think should be considered as persons with disabilities. So we analyzed demographic and health survey data, DHS data, for 12 countries: Cambodia, Haiti, Maldives, Mali, Mauritania, Nigeria, Pakistan, Rwanda, Senegal, South Africa, Timor-Leste, and Uganda. We also analyzed census data for 3 countries: Guatemala, Kenya, and Tonga. So what do we find in terms of what is feasible for disaggregation? We show that it is possible to produce disability disaggregated indicators at the national level as well as at the regional level to document within country inequalities and for intersectional subgroups of people with disabilities, so males, females, rural and urban residents, and by age group. With census data in 3 countries, indicators could be disaggregated based on disability and for intersectional groups at national, regional, as well as district levels. So what are the implications of being able to do such disaggregation at national and subnational level? Well, we recommend that DHS and population censuses should be regularly used to document and understand the inequalities people with disabilities experience at national and subnational levels overall and for subgroups by age, rural, urban, residents, and age. Another implication is that a lot more disability disaggregated indicators could be produced. Many of the data sets in the 125 countries that have at least one data set with functional difficulty questions are designed to be representative of their populations at both national and regional levels. So data sets that were not analyzed in this report could be explored for their potential to produce disability disaggregated indicators at subnational levels. Finally, national governments and international organizations need to allocate ongoing resources and capacity building towards disability data analysis for national statistics offices and other stakeholders to analyze a growing body of data that can produce disability disaggregated statistics at both national and subnational levels. So now, let me share a few of the results from the data analysis. I'll start with the share of adults with functional difficulties. First, at the national level, the share of adults with any difficulty in the 15 countries ranges across countries from 12% in Cambodia to almost 33% in Uganda. Within countries, the share of adults with functional difficulties does vary from region to region, but it is sizable, so meaning above 5% in the regions of the 15 countries. They are not high, so in other words, people with disabilities are not highly concentrated in certain regions and absent in other regions. They are spread out. So I will share on my screen a table for Kenya. It's we're going to put the link in the chat box. So one moment. So you should see my screen and the table for Kenya. So for Kenya, the national share of persons with functional difficulties stands at 12.7%. And seeing and walking difficulties tend to be the most common types of difficulties nationally and within region. And that's a finding we have for other countries as well. So for example, here, the first region in the table is the Baringo region, and we have 10.2% of adults with functional difficulties. And for example, 5.5% of adults have seeing difficulties. So scrolling down in Nairobi, 8.2% of adults have functional difficulties, while in the Migori region, 16.7% have difficulties. So there is some variation in the share of adults with difficulties across regions. So what are the implications of these results for policy and research? So for policy, disability rights as per the CRPD need to be upheld within countries, in all regions, districts, and villages. And local policy making in general or in sectors from education to poverty reduction needs to be inclusive of people with disabilities and take into account disability inequalities across and within geographies. So we need more research as well on the variation of the share of persons with functional difficulties within countries to find out the extent to which demographic factors, resources, and environmental factors contribute to the variation. Okay, so last but not least, I'll share some findings on disability gaps. So that is inequalities that we find when analyzing disability disaggregated indicators. So we calculated the share of persons who are multidimensionally poor. That means persons who experience several deprivations, such as having low educational attainment, not being employed, not having adequate living conditions, such as having poor quality flooring or not having electricity. The multidimensional poverty rate among persons with functional difficulties in the 15 countries is consistently high, so meaning above 50% at both national and regional levels. And we find an association between multidimensional poverty and the degree of functional difficulties in all the countries. So in other words, persons with some difficulty have higher poverty headcounts than persons with no difficulty, but lower rates of multidimensional poverty than persons with at least a lot of difficulty. So I'll just show you another map for another set of results. So this time for Guatemala. These maps represent the multidimensional poverty rates. The map to the left is the multidimensional poverty rate for persons with disability. In the middle, it's for persons with some difficulty. And then to the right is for persons with at least a lot of difficulty. So the darker colors in the map in the middle and to the right illustrate how multidimensional poverty is more common as the degree of functional difficulty increases. So this pattern is found for all regions of Guatemala, including in remote regions in the north. But we also find it at a more local level when we do the analysis at the municipality level, as I want to highlight briefly here on these maps. So, in addition, we find that among people with disabilities, women, older adults, and people in rural areas have on average higher multidimensional poverty headcounts than men, younger adults, and people in urban areas, respectively. For some indicators, results suggest that disability gaps are consistently experienced across and within countries. So that's for educational attainment, multidimensional poverty. For other indicators, such as having safely managed water in a household, results do vary within and across countries. And so perhaps here national estimates can hide a lot of variation within countries. So I'll conclude with some implications of these results in relation to the inequalities people with disabilities experience. So we need more research and data analysis, including mapping exercises to zoom in on the rights of persons with disabilities at the local level, the barriers people with disabilities face and the resources they have, such as access to assistive technology and information, vary across geographies and may contribute to very diverse human rights outcomes within countries. So understanding the drivers of inequality as well as enablers of inclusion is important to inform policies and reduce disability gaps. And then finally, policies, programs, and practices, no matter where they take place within a country, need to be inclusive of people with disabilities at both national and subnational levels. People with disabilities and their representative organizations should be included in policy making. So thank you very much. I was a little longer than planned, but thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Professor Sophie Mitra. And I noticed that we already got 2 questions from the audience. Very good. So I let Sophie to read them and then we come back to them later. But let's go on now to the other panelists. And it is my pleasure to introduce next speaker, who is Sally Nyuta. She's a disability and human rights champion with 15 years experience in disability and development. She currently works at United Disabled Persons of Kenya, UDPK, as the Chief Executive Officer. UDPK is a federation umbrella of organization of persons with disabilities in Kenya. So Sally, please, your turn. Happy to give the floor to you.
Good morning, good evening, good afternoon. Thank you very much, Ambassador. My name is Sally. I'm from Kenya, as you have said. And for our brothers and sisters who cannot see me, I'm wearing a blue t-shirt. It is representing one of our initiatives known as Enable Me. It's an online space where persons with disabilities engage and share their experiences. Thank you very much for this, and I'm happy to participate in this discussion. Let me start by saying that Kenya ratified the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities in 2008, and there is commitment to collect data on persons with disabilities, as demonstrated by the signing of the Inclusive Data Charter, which was done just after the Global Disability Summit, the first conference in 2018. We acknowledge that the Kenya government in 2019 collected data on persons with disabilities during its census. And however, we were concerned that this national census did not reflect the reality in terms of data on persons with disabilities in the country. So from the results of the Bureau, 2.2% of Kenyans, or 918,270 Kenyans, have disabilities. And these results were much lower than the 4.6 that we got from a domestic survey in 2007 and the previous census of 2009 that showed 3.3% of Kenyans are persons with disabilities. When you also compare with our neighbors, Uganda, who also use the Washington set, the short set of questions, Uganda got 12%, while we got 2.2. So when you look at the analysis that Sophie has just presented, Sophie from the Disability Data Initiative, you have seen from the findings that she has shared about Kenya, it shows that it really matters, you know, when you want to identify persons with disabilities and collect information about them. So it matters where you put the cutoff, because if you look at for Kenya, our Bureau just analyzed under the question where people had a lot of difficulties. So it didn't do any analysis for people who had any kind of you know, some levels of difficulty. So it just looked at people who had a lot of difficulties in functionality. So that's why we got the low percentage of 2.2. But if you look at what Disability Data Initiative report, because they also analyzed level of difficulties, meaning you have any kind of level of difficulty, some level of difficulty, or you have a lot of difficulty in functioning. And when you look at the results, that kind of analysis jumped from 2.2, showing a prevalence rate of 12.7% of Kenyans with disabilities as having disabilities. So this is more closer to the real situation, or what we as non-state actors see as a reality for persons with disabilities. But however, we have already challenged the Bureau of Statistics on the 2.2%, and they're actually planning another national survey on persons with disabilities. So hopefully we'll move very close to this 2.2 or even higher than what we found from the current census. So the report by Disability Data Initiative it helps us, it adds on to the analysis that was done by the Bureau of Statistics. So it goes into some level of detail. There's a lot of analysis for all the 47 counties. It also goes all the way to the constituency level and also the district levels. And it shows the different variations, like Sophia said, in terms of functionality among women and men in all these different regions. So it is really, it adds on to the evidence that we need. For example, it confirms, because while it's well known that persons with disabilities are poorer than persons without disabilities, this report actually confirms. Now we have the evidence that we need when we go to government, particularly our local governments. These are county governments, and we'll tell them, look, this is an analysis of the census report of Kenya, and it shows really persons with disabilities are poorer. Our local governments in Kenya, the 47 of them, they plan, they do budgeting, and they do policy formulation, and they also have different programs and different services, such as early childhood education that they offer, agriculture, among other things. This kind of report is going to be useful for policymakers at local level to be able to plan and also program from a disability perspective. This report is also very useful because in Kenya, we have a lot of organizations of persons with disabilities, or OPDs, at the local level, and they conduct advocacy, they engage with local governments. It gives us evidence in terms of how persons with disabilities are faring on in terms of health, in terms of access to livelihoods, and it also tells us the situations of persons with disabilities in terms of economic participation. So that informs how governments plan for example, even access to credit and financial services. So it is a really rich analysis. We also look, as UDPK, we would also want persons with disabilities to interact with this information. We look forward as a next step, as part of the partnerships that we look for on empowering persons with disabilities to be able to understand data and be able to use data for evidence when they are conducting advocacy. So that's it from Kenya and our perspective about this report. Thank you so much, Ambassador, and listeners. Back to you.
Thank you, Sally, so much for these insights from Kenya. Very interesting to hear. And now we will move to Pacific region. I will introduce Liza Veretti. She's Director of Operations of the Pacific Disability Forum, oversighting programs and operations of the forum, who has membership of 76 organizations, of which 46 are organizations of persons with disabilities in 22 Pacific Island countries and territories. Please, you have the floor, Liza.
Thank you, Madam Ambassador, and a very good morning to all of us who are linking in, whether it's your morning or your afternoon. Pleasant morning greetings from New York. So I am not a person with disability. I'm a woman with light brown skin color, fuzzy curly hair. Today I'm having a bright red top with a black and white traditional tapa print coat that I'm wearing in. Great to be part of the event this morning, and maybe to offer some of our insights and also some of our own experience in the work that we do around data advocacy, for policy intervention, and also, if time permits, on the work that we do with our OPDs to build their capacity to engage better with their National Statistics Office on the process where Washington Group question is used, whether it's in a census or survey. But today, let me speak to us on the report that Sophie had shared briefly, and acknowledging the great work that has done by Sophie and her team, and congratulations on that, Sophie. I'd like to particularly speak to the Tonga report. So that stems out of the 2016 census. So Tonga also have a disability monograph, some initial analysis of the census that shows desegregation in terms of the impairment group, and also the cutoff points to those who respond at the some level, the a lot of difficulty level, and also the cannot do it at all level. And hence, out of that census, it has a prevalence rate noting persons with disabilities at a lot of difficulty. It reports also on, I think, a few outcome area around employment and also education. But today, with regards of the work that and the report produced by Sophie and her team, we as an OPD, and thanks to Sophie for the report that that is launched, and we'll be able to use these and also share it with our members. While the first round of analysis and report gave us numbers and the disaggregation of how many are deaf people, how many, like visual impairment with either blind, no vision at all, or have some difficulty of a lot, and how many are schooling age or working age, or how many are adult population, whether they reside in the rural areas or in urban areas. So we have that information, which is useful. But the next level of analysis and the report produced by Sophie and her team, it gives us another level of to take the advocacy to another level. And in this case, it's talking about the multidimensional of poverty, multidimensional poverty that speaks to not only, for example, me as a woman with disability, with a poor education outcome, poor health outcome, maybe, and also the lack of employment, or the lack of a livelihood or source of income. And I'm sure it would also report the kind of support person or support service that I need, or assistive device that I use. So multidimensional poverty, enables OPD like ourselves to bring our advocacy to another level. It brings our advocacy to another level to be able to show the diversity of the barriers that we face. While, yes, I'm a woman, for example, I'm a deaf woman, and, I cannot access education, so I have poor education outcome, poor health outcome. So this kind of report and analysis, if it's put out there, it is going to strengthen our advocacy, because we will be able to show the initial analysis and to show numbers and figures of now the new analysis, looking at it from a multidimensional poverty angle, and that confirms that while persons with disabilities are further marginalized, who are poor, with low education or poor education outcome and poor health outcome, this is what we can point to in terms of evidence. And this is the evidence that is needed. Like, you are poor, no income, lack of access, and you're a person with disability with no support service. And I think this is very important, the work that Sophie has done in her team, and it's going to be useful to data users like ourselves, OPDs, including NGOs, who are at the table of advocating for disability rights or rights of persons with disabilities. I'll stop here, Madam Ambassador, and back to you, and happy to take questions later on if time permits. Thank you, Madam Ambassador.
Thank you, Liza, so much. And you really highlighted how data is key to meaningfully inform policy interventions for persons with disabilities. And I thank all the panelists so far for taking the time so precisely. So I think we do have some time for discussion in the end. And please do continue sending your questions in the Q&A box as well. So, but let's move on. The next speaker is Valentina Vargas Riguer, co-founder and project management advisor for Women with the Ability to Dream in Colors, Mujeres con Capacidad de Soñar a Colores. In Guatemala, she's a researcher and activist for the rights of people with disabilities with a focus on intersectionalities. So Valentina, please, you have the floor.
Muchas gracias, es un gusto estar acá. Voy a hablar en español para que puedan cambiar los formatos, pero bueno. Flor y yo somos de una colectiva en Guatemala, una pequeña colectiva de mujeres con discapacidad en el área rural indígena de Guatemala. Y lo que queremos compartir hoy es un poco de cómo este tipo de datos ayudan a organizaciones de personas con discapacidad en las bases, en el trabajo comunitario que hacemos. Y tenemos 3 usos principales para el uso de los datos. El primero es, bueno, la incidencia, que ya hablaron bastante las compañeras que vinieron antes que yo sobre la importancia de la incidencia para los gobiernos locales. El segundo es justificar nuestro trabajo. Lastimosamente hay mucha resistencia en nuestro caso al trabajo con mujeres con discapacidad. Hay mucha resistencia por el sistema patriarcal en el que vivimos, por las estructuras en las que trabajamos, y poder decir con claridad, esta es la situación de las personas con discapacidad, pero además esta es la situación de las mujeres con discapacidad, nos ayuda a plantarnos en una base fuerte, en decir, pues estamos aquí por esto y vamos a seguir trabajando por esto. Entonces sí es muy importante para nosotras tener este tipo de información. También tener datos locales nos ha ayudado mucho en la gestión de los fondos. Nosotras trabajamos mucho con fondos feministas, que por suerte existen este tipo de fondos que son flexibles, que reconocen la experiencia vivida, la importancia del conocimiento que tenemos cada una de nosotras, pero hay algunos fondos, sobre todo los que son más grandes, los que nos permiten tener más sostenibilidad a través del tiempo, que sí piden información estadística. Y no siempre tenemos acceso a esos datos, pero tener esos datos, saber a nivel local en nuestro municipio, en los municipios en los que trabajamos, en el departamento en el que accionamos, nos permite gestionar ese tipo de fondos que nos dan más sostenibilidad a las organizaciones. Entonces, tener estos datos nos ayuda a justificar nuestro trabajo. También tener este tipo de datos nos ayuda a comunicar, a concientizar, a compartir. Nosotras trabajamos mucho a través de metodologías artísticas. Tenemos una obra de teatro de las oprimidas en donde utilizamos datos. Les quiero mostrar muy rápidamente una imagen de nuestra obra de teatro. En la imagen se ven a 4 compañeras actrices. 2 están atrás, una está haciendo una cara como de no sé, y enfrente hay un palo en donde hay unas telas verdes que representan a los hombres con discapacidad y hay unas telas rojas, menos telas, 3 telas rojas que representan a las mujeres con discapacidad. Entonces, esta es una herramienta que nosotras usamos para compartir con el público que no solo hay exclusión hacia las personas con discapacidad en general, sino que hay más exclusión hacia las mujeres que a los hombres con discapacidad. Y esta ha sido una buena forma de compartir información de manera accesible con las comunidades con las que trabajamos y nos ha funcionado mucho para que las personas digan, ah, bueno, es verdad, porque si a veces solo decimos un dato, un número, pero hemos notado que cuando el público lo ve reflejado de esta manera, realmente entiende, y muchas personas nos han dicho, ahora entiendo por qué están trabajando con mujeres con discapacidad. O ahora entiendo que yo soy una mujer sin discapacidad, pero habiendo visto esa información, habiendo tenido acceso a ese dato, ahora entiendo la situación de las mujeres con discapacidad. Entonces, pues nos sirve tener información más localizada para poder compartir con las comunidades con las que trabajamos y generar cambios ahí. Y muy rápidamente, pues creemos que es muy importante la información que este informe nos da. También identificamos áreas en las que se puede seguir investigando y que nos serviría para este trabajo local que hacemos. Específicamente investigar más en temas de género, cuál es la diferencia entre hombres y mujeres en esta pobreza, cómo es la situación de las mujeres, y también pensar en las personas indígenas con discapacidad. En un país como Guatemala es un tema que tenemos que seguir investigando, porque definitivamente nosotras sabemos en nuestra experiencia que las mujeres indígenas con discapacidad viven más exclusión y hay una brecha más grande que las personas que no son indígenas. Entonces, es importante que sigamos investigando a nivel local cuáles son estas brechas, estas desigualdades que siguen existiendo. Y ahora pues le voy a pasar la palabra a mi compañera Flori, que va a hablar más sobre estas experiencias vividas, porque nos parece que eso también es importante.
Hola, mucho gusto. Mi nombre es Floridalma y yo soy de la colectiva de mujeres con capacidad de enseñar a colores de Guatemala. Y bueno, desde nuestras experiencias como mujeres con discapacidad indígenas, pues ha sido de mucho apoyo para nosotras, porque las mujeres con discapacidad indígenas de áreas rurales vivimos diferente forma de discriminación, no tenemos acceso a la educación, al trabajo, a la salud, a la información accesible. También somos discriminadas por ser mujeres, por ser indígenas, por vivir en un área rural, por tener cierta edad. Pues eso nos ha dejado atrás y nos sigue dejando atrás todavía. Desde nuestras experiencias como mujeres con discapacidad de áreas rurales, pues ha sido una situación súper difícil porque todas vivimos nuestra discapacidad de diferente forma. Y también una barrera súper grande que hemos encontrado es el que no tengamos información accesible, por ejemplo, porque nosotras hablamos un idioma, por ejemplo, el mío es cachiquel, pero si yo quiero información accesible para que yo la entienda y la comprenda, pues si yo no hablar español, pues se me dificulta. Entonces nos ponemos a pensar en eso. Si a mí se me dificultara, por ejemplo, entonces a las demás compañeras también, o sea, no sabemos exactamente qué tipos de barreras son las que enfrentan día a día. Y para nosotros el haber encontrado este espacio en la colectiva, en donde participamos diferentes mujeres con diferentes discapacidades, ha sido un espacio muy bonito en el cual nosotras hemos aprendido muchísimas cosas. Por ejemplo, el tener acceso a la información sobre la salud sexual y reproductiva, qué es la menstruación, qué es el amor propio. Hemos tenido varios espacios en los que hemos convivido, compartido y en el que nos hemos encontrado y en el que también hemos sido nosotras, en el que nos han dicho que hablemos, que nos expresemos, que no tengamos miedo, que aprendamos muchísimas cosas. Entonces estos espacios han sido varios espacios en los que sí nos hemos encontrado con nosotras mismas. También hemos tenido ese apoyo entre todas. Ahí nadie te excluye, nadie te dice qué es lo que no está bien. Ahí todo pues se hace sentir muy bonito. Y no solo para las que ya estamos en la colectiva, sino que para las otras compañeras que vienen participando también en otras actividades. Ha sido un espacio en el que siempre nos dicen cuándo va a haber otra actividad, cuándo vamos a hacer cierta cosa. Para ellas es un momento de alegría, de libertad, de autonomía, el llegar a ciertas actividades porque siempre están encerradas en sus casas, siempre dependen de la familia, siempre les dicen que no pueden hacer las cosas, pero en el espacio en el que nosotras estamos, pues siempre es un lugar libre y muy bonito para compartir entre todas. Y pues para mí y para las compañeras con discapacidad, creo que ha sido un reto también el seguir adelante y darnos a conocer como mujeres con discapacidad de áreas rurales y un espacio donde podemos ser nosotras. Y pues también les quería comentar y compartir que somos la primera colectiva de mujeres con diferentes discapacidades y es una enorme alegría para nosotras el poder darnos a conocer y que nuestra voz se escuche.
Gracias.
Thank you so much for both of you. I didn't realize that you will be on the same screen. I should have introduced also Floridalma in the beginning. So I just repeat that she's a co-coordinator of the Sexual and Reproductive Rights Project that they just described, an activist and for the rights of women with disabilities, and an actress in the play Forum Venus Floreses. So just this also to highlight both of you in the same way. Thank you so much for sharing this experience and such inspiring and empowering what you were telling of your work. Thank you so much. And also the way you described the experience of being young woman, young Indigenous and rural woman with disabilities. So very interesting to hear, I'm sure, for all of us. So we will move on to our last speaker, who is Rosario Galarza. She joined International Disability Alliance in 2021 and is currently working in the Capacity Building Unit. She's responsible for strengthening the capacities of women with disabilities and underrepresented identities in IDA's work. Rosario, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Madam Ambassador. My name is Rosario. I am a Latin American blind woman with black hair. I would like to talk about the importance of data, especially in Global South. Data are important to understand the situations of persons with disabilities, and as a result, what policies and programs are needed to strengthen our full inclusion into society. Yet there is a pervasive lack of disability data, which means it is difficult to create policy and programs inclusive of those most at risk of being left behind, including persons with disabilities who make up 16% of the world's population. There is general lack of or out-of-date disability data at the national and subnational levels, and especially in the Global South. There is even a greater lack of data on women and girls, children, older persons, and other underrepresented groups of persons with disabilities, which pushes these groups even further behind. Moreover, there is little data on persons with disabilities in emergency situations and on the experiences of migrants, refugees, and internally displaced persons with disabilities. Despite this, it is good to remember that the CRPD and the 2030 Agenda mandate countries to collect and disaggregate disability data, notably CRPD Article 31 and in the 2030 Agenda, paragraphs 48 and 57, and SDG target 17.18. I provide some reasons for which there is also lack of national and subnational data. Persons with disabilities and the representative organizations all too often are excluded from disability data decision-making processes, especially from the start, and thus their perspective are not included or recognized. OPD data often are viewed as unreliable or out of date, especially if qualitative methods are used to collect data, our sample sizes are small. Accessibility is an issue in collecting and accessing data. First, accessibility measures such as sign language interpreters are rarely provided in consultations with OPDs. Second, data toolkits and platforms are often inaccessible for screen reader users. The lack of disability training and awareness creates barriers, especially for enumerators. We have learned that if enumerators are trained on disability awareness, more persons with disabilities are captured in the data. The lack of surveys in local languages also is a challenge, including national sign language, which are needed to capture minority language users, including deaf sign language users. Yet we can strengthen inclusive data processes at the national and subnational levels in the Global South and elsewhere by, first and foremost, consult and actively involve persons with disabilities and their representative organizations in all the data processes in the entire data value chain. This is essential since OPDs understand their communities and experience better than others, and they can reach members easily and have the trust and cultural awareness. Thus, this ensures a more accurate picture of the situation to create effective evidence-based policies and programs. They provide resources and support to OPDs in data capacity to ensure consistent and reliable data. Also establish new and strengthen existing multi-stakeholder data partnership that meaningfully include OPDs. Provide OPD-led trainings to national statistical authorities on disability awareness, especially using resources that we have developed, such as the Disability Data Advocacy Toolkit and the new Disability Data Workshop for OPDs. Train OPDs to become enumerators themselves to better survey their own communities. Strengthen and encourage the use of citizen-generated data in national statistical systems to fill data gaps and harmonize disability data to support the development of comprehensive evidence-based policies and programs for persons with disabilities. One way to do this is to support official statistical bodies to collect and disaggregate data by disability using the Washington Group short set of questions and the Washington Group UNICEF Child Functioning Module. In closing, evidence-based data on persons with disabilities at the national and subnational levels are instrumental in first, identifying gaps and priorities in access to services, infrastructure, and support systems, then enable policymakers, organizations, and advocates to monitor the impact of national policies, laws, and programs, and then highlighting intersectional issues such as gender identity, age, race, ethnicity, indigenous identity, sexual orientation, among others. I will stop here and thank you so much, Madam Ambassador.
Thank you, Rosario, so much for your views and insights. So this concludes the panel part of our program today. There were excellent questions in the Q&A box, and I could just read a couple of them. Sophie has actually answered them already, but I will ask if she could reflect them a little bit jointly here too. For example, there was a question about were any disabled persons involved in the development, delivery, and analysis of the data that Sophie presented us earlier. There was also a question, how did you ensure that invisible persons with disabilities, homeless or in other settings were included in this data, which was based on household surveys? So that is something that is a good question as well. And there was other questions as well, but I think I would give back to Sophie now, if you would like to maybe repeat some of the answers to these or give more details if you feel that would be appropriate. Sophie, please.
Sure. Yeah, thank you so much. So regarding how the data was maybe developed and collected, so we did not collect the data ourselves. We are using secondary data sets that typically are collected by statistics offices. So we have no control and very limited information on how the data collection was done and how diverse the staff, the survey staff were. However, we are a diverse team. So in terms of how the data was analyzed, we are a diverse team of researchers, whether it's the actual the people who do the research or the steering committee. So that's to answer the question on the involvement of persons with disabilities. And then the question on data being whether the data captures people who are institutionalized, incarcerated, or homeless? No, it does not. So that's a really important limitation of the data we use. So household survey data and the population census data sets we use are household based. So they do not capture marginalized populations that are not household based. So that's an important limitation, and that probably leads to underestimation of disability related inequalities. So that's really important. So thanks for bringing that up, and that should be noted, I think, whenever we present results that use household based data. And I wanted to highlight that I don't know, I think maybe earlier not everyone got the link to the new report, so I'll put it back in the chat.
Thank you so much. Do we have any other questions from the audience? Please don't hesitate. There is still some time. To the other panelists, if you would like to ask anything from the country perspective that we were presented today, that was at least for me personally very fascinating, and like I said earlier, also very inspiring to see what kind of work is done in different parts of the world. When one works here in New York in offices and only in negotiation, it is so important to get the sense of what has been done in the grassroots level as well, and of the challenges of the very tough conditions and challenges you need to face there, and also on your creativity to find solutions as well. I don't see any more questions. So I think I will then start just wrapping up the session today. And I think what we can very easily say today, that disability disaggregated statistic can be produced and should be produced both national, subnational levels, and for intersectional groups such as women or older people with disabilities. And Sophie also underlined in her presentation that this should be done also in conflict situations or during the kind of special circumstances we might face, like the pandemic time, because that is really such statistics are so critical to inform advocacy and policy efforts. So we need to do, we have to have the data to know what is the right way forward. And of course, what was also obvious in so many things that you all said is that more resources need to go towards data collection and data analysis and capacity building as well. So money, just money isn't always enough, but we need to make sure that things are done correctly and in a right way. We need to build partnerships between data analysts and persons with disabilities and organizations of persons with disabilities, governments and other stakeholders, to make the collection of data and the production disability disaggregated statistic systematic across countries. So I think this is something that I wanted to say in the end, and I will just check if we have any more questions or comments. Just a second. Yeah, no, nothing there.
There was a hand up, but I don't know if
okay, let's
question.
see.
Yeah,
we can. Do I see the participant with a question? I think I'm not able to find the participant, but if you just unmute your mic and please go ahead, you have the floor. All right, I think we don't have anyone taking the floor. So I think we will end here, and I will thank once again all the panelists. You were all excellent. This was great. And also, of course, Fordham Research Consortium on Disability for putting this event together. And for Finland, this is a really this topic is really, really dear to us and in a high on our agenda, in our foreign policy agenda. So always pleasure for us to be part of this kind of discussion, and we will really do our best here at the United Nations setting to promote the rights of the persons with disabilities. So unless there is anything else people would like to intervene or comment, no, then I will just thank you once again so much, and I wish you wonderful Friday and happy weekend. Thank you so much.